Hey folks, uh, my name is Dustin Siggins here with Sam, Casey, and Dennis. We're going to talk about how, with tariffs creating market uncertainty and a lot of companies pulling back on what was supposed to be strong growth in 2025, how communicators can show the value and necessity of doubling down on marketing and branding during tough economic times. So if everyone can introduce themselves, we'll start with Dennis, then Casey, and then Sam. Give a little bit about yourself and then help the audience understand maybe experience you've had when you doubled down when the competition was pulling back.
You want me to start?
Sure, go ahead, Dennis.
The name is Dennis. I have been self-employed my whole life. During COVID, we had an interesting scenario within my business, and I was able to address that by literally doubling my marketing budget during that time. We can talk more about that later, Dustin, or do you want me to open up and elaborate a bit?
Oh, elaborate, yeah.
Okay. In my semi-retirement years, my college roommate and I started a home service company called Cape Cod Gutter Monkeys. We've since opened up to where we have 6 or 7 locations now, but at the time when COVID came around, we had 2. We had Cape Cod Gutter Monkeys and South Shore Gutter Monkeys here in Massachusetts. And I was actually coming out of the radio studio on March 23rd when I came down into the main office of the radio studio at CODCOM, basically Cape Cod Communications radio studio. And the general manager, Tim, asked me if I would sit in on a meeting. And this was May 23rd of 20. He told me that the governor just shut the state down and he lost 70% of his radio revenue. The car dealerships all pulled their ads. Restaurants were no longer going to open. Restaurant and other revenue is huge for radio. And on March 23rd, all the restaurants pulled their radio ads. So my friends at this one radio station realized they're basically going to be running at a loss for some particular time. And as I sat in this meeting, the owner of the station, the general manager, and all the salespeople were in the room, and myself and one of my coworkers, Trevor, was sitting in the room. And I said, this isn't the time to be cutting back on your advertising. This is the time to be doubling down on your advertising. And we had a quick conversation about that. Now, at the time, I was probably advertising on 12 radio stations. So I came back to the office, I crunched some numbers, and I threw some ideas out to different people. And so let's say I was on 12 radio stations. I called each and every station. Now, iHeart, I was on 3 of theirs. CODCOM, I was on 4 of theirs. CCB Media, I was on a couple. Then there were a few up in Plymouth, close to Boston. We were on those. I called all the radio stations and I asked, what would they be willing to do for me if I was to take out exactly twice the radio footprint that I have? So if I have 80 monthly ads on this radio station, I want 160. I went down to all 10 or 12 radio stations, and basically they were selling me radio advertising space at 15 cents on the dollar. So during COVID, now at the time, my wife, who was also our office manager, we were being told by our accountant and our attorney, you need to get some of this PPP money. So I told my wife, spend 30 minutes on it. If you can't get to the bottom of it, we're not doing it. So she probably spent an hour and said, no, there's more red tape than you can imagine. And I said, forget it, we're not doing it. So we spent our time and our efforts on doubling our radio footprint for 15% for 15% more than what we're currently spending. And I also signed 3-year contracts. So
Didn't know that part. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So basically from March, call it April 1st of 2020, for the next 3 years, I had doubled my footprint for only 15% of the cost that it would have normally cost me to do that. And those
Okay.
contracts basically just ended.
So Dad, that's the small business perspective. Casey, you said you had a similar story, but as the consultant for businesses that knew they needed to double down during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's exactly right. My name's Casey O'Rourke, and I am a fractional chief marketing officer and public relations consultant out of Kansas City. I specialize in B2B and professional and financial services companies. And my experience in 2020 was that my clients really needed the communications and messaging help, not only to talk to their customers in real time about the changes to their business, but also to game plan their strategy moving forward. And those that found an anchor in their strategy seemed to flinch so much less than those who weren't anchored in strategy. Those companies who were able to stay the course minimum with their marketing planning really came out of the pandemic much more successful. And certainly those who were able and had the bandwidth to expand their marketing efforts definitely saw market share gains.
We'll come back to anchor. I want to hear more about that, Casey, later. That seems really important.
Okay.
Sam, go ahead.
Sure. I love that term, actually, anchor in strategy. That's a great one, Casey. So my name is Samantha Riel. I am the founder of Balsam and Cedar, which is an agency that focuses on helping businesses get to the next revenue level. So whatever that is, typically there's something that's holding them back, whether it's people, processes, or systems, and we help get to the bottom of it and fix it. So that's a little bit of background of what I do. I've been a marketer for 20 years. So I have gone through this several times now with the growth and shrinking of marketing budgets, which is crazy to say. I feel like I just graduated yesterday, so for me to say we've been through this times is a little nuts, but it's true. And in 2020 specifically, but I want to go even further back, all the way back to the recession, because I was in a nonprofit in 2008, 2009 for the recession. There was a lot of talk about how difficult it is to spend money in marketing when you're talking about laying people off. It's really, really easy to look at these big buckets of money that you have dedicated to program spend and say, you know what, if we just cut that, maybe we wouldn't have to lay as many people off, or maybe we wouldn't need to do this. And so I've spent a lot of time over the last 20 years really working towards thinking about this as long-term gains as opposed to that short-term fix. And I think so many leadership teams spend time thinking about that short term because that's what's fresh, that's what's in front of them. There's a recency bias there, but not coming up with those contingency plans that say, if we don't hit our sales numbers, or if this happens with the economy, this is the change we're going to have to make, or here's the things we have to pull back. Not as a punishment, which sometimes they can be used that way, or a threat saying, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. We're going to cut the staff by 20%. More along the lines of just coming up with that plan so everyone can be on the same page. And so that's what it sounds like, Casey, when you're talking about that anchor. Those are the types of strategic initiatives that you really need to do.
Agreed.
Now let's talk a little bit about that, because we've now talked about really three things: long-term planning, anchor, core strategy, but then also, Sam, you address communicating, especially internally, but also externally to stakeholders, so they know what's going on, so they don't feel like they're getting stabbed in the back. So let's talk about strategy first. Dennis, I know that this is the 2020 pandemic, like with Sam, it wasn't your first rodeo through tough economic times. How do you look at your businesses to plan for the long term, knowing that a recession might happen, whether it's a pandemic, financial crash, or something else?
Well, first of all, branding occurs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I don't advertise more during the busy season or more during the slow season. I don't plan my marketing around the seasonality of my clients or my business or my product. Branding occurs all the time, all year long. So the only time I modify my marketing budget is to increase it. I never decrease, because as a business, you're growing or you're shrinking. A business is a living entity. A rock isn't. A rock doesn't change its size. It's always the same size. But a tree is either growing or it's dying. And a business is the same way. So the only time I change or adjust my marketing is to grow it. I might adjust the nature of it a little bit, but so marketing stays the same or grows. So when you're talking about a situation like the crash of '08, we knew it was coming. We just didn't know when, and we didn't know how severe, and we didn't know how long it would last. I was recently interviewed by the Cape Cod Times on the impact of tariffs. So tariffs don't move my needle. I am in the aluminum business. I recycle literally tons of aluminum every year. I process new aluminum probably 3 tons a month. But the cost of aluminum, worst case scenario, my suppliers are telling me it's going to go up 8 to 16 cents a pound. Now, currently I pay $3 a pound for my giant rolls, 800-900 pound rolls of aluminum that come into my shop. All they are is flat stock. I'm paying $3 a pound. So if my price goes up 8 to 16 cents, we're looking at 3 to 6% of cost. And if my job cost on a $5,000 job is $1,000, worst case scenario is my cost of aluminum will go up 3 to 6%. That's $30 to $60 on a $5,000 job. I'm not even changing the price to the customer on that. That $30 to $60 on a job, a $5,000 job, doesn't move the needle. So it doesn't impact me. I'm not going to worry about it, and I'm not going to make changes.
So in other words, and you're talking about planning, you understand the nuts and bolts of your company and your business model and your pricing so that you're aware of potential shocks to the system, and you can adjust.
I asked both of my suppliers. We proactively, we called them, we discussed it with them, and this is what they told us. Now my partner Andy decided, because aluminum, unlike many products, doesn't go bad, he probably ordered an extra $40,000 or $50,000 in inventory. He did it about a month ago. So we have way more inventory than we need right now. And during COVID, the biggest challenge was getting the stuff, getting the aluminum. We couldn't get it.
Sure.
So there were trucker strikes. So I used to just call my order in on Thursday, and they delivered Monday morning every week, 50 weeks a year, all year long. That's how it worked. COVID hit. There were strikes. There were shortages. People were being paid to sit on their hands and not work. Factories were shut down. Now, all of a sudden, you couldn't get the aluminum. Prior to COVID, we used to pay 90 cents a pound. Throughout the journey, it went to $4.25. It went from 90 cents to $4.25 a pound. And I was driving from Cape Cod to Springfield, Mass, Hartford, Connecticut, Perth Amboy, New Jersey, Colonnade, New York. Before COVID, I couldn't find Colonnade, New York on the map. Now I'm sending myself and some of my coworkers to these places, sometimes 3, 4, 5 hours one way, just to buy the stuff and bring it back.
Now, I suspect that, Dennis, that based upon your model isn't impacted by tariffs, but obviously a lot of corporations are, especially international corporations, are trying to import or export to the United States. So Casey, can you talk a little bit about what your clients have seen related to tariffs specifically, and how they are looking at this from a long-term planning perspective, how they're using that anchor component to communicate during this time of uncertainty?
Yeah, clarity has become really, really important to them, both to Dennis's point of really, really understanding their business, understanding the effects that any changes might have on their business, and then, communicating that, to Samantha's point, internally, being crystal clear at what the reality is, and then also being really transparent and really authentic and really, really clear with your stakeholders, whether that's external or internal. Just kind of letting people know the reality of where your business is and what your strategy is, and how you're moving forward in the long term. So when we talk about that anchor strategy, you know, we're still communicating our unique selling points. We're still communicating the foundation of who we are, but we're also having to communicate the new reality within which we're moving.
And then, you know, Sam, when we're talking about technology firms, a lot of them, China has something like 60% of the battery manufacturing and similar technology products, and then they ship them around the world. And right now there's a tariff war between the United States and China. You know, when we talk about why should you invest during tough times, if costs are going to go up significantly or there's going to be delays in products for technology companies, how do you encourage them to still invest, to still put more dollars into marketing and branding, and maybe they won't have the product for a while, or their costs are going to, you know, tariff of 300% here and 200% there. That's a lot of cost increase.
I think for B2B tech in particular, international, domestic, it doesn't really matter. I really have to go back to Dennis's point about if you're not growing, you're shrinking. If you're not a tree and you're living, you're dying. That's basically the thing, except I think what a lot of tech businesses did in the last 5 years is met market demand so quickly that they weren't thinking about, okay, what happens if it's not quite here? So tariffs are a big issue right now, obviously. I won't get into all of that, but I think the bigger piece for B2B tech businesses is inflation as opposed to tariffs. Like, so I look at it as it's costs no matter what you do. So inflation wise, the cost of everything going up. Every year, every tech company that I negotiate a contract with has gone up 15 to 20% every single year. That's just a standard kind of thing. So it's very much like healthcare costs, right? Every single year, once you get through that initial contract, there's always some type of an increase, right? And so coming from most recently VC startup, a lot of that is growth at all costs. So you are investing and you are looking at how fast can you grow in the short term, and we'll deal with the long term when it comes. So a lot of the businesses now are reflecting back what's happening in the industry, not just, I mean, tariffs is the most recent thing, but the economy and inflation is the bigger issue for a lot of those tech businesses right now.
And so, you know, for my company doing public relations, the first thing that goes is the marketing budget, but the communications budget, right? Because they want to keep finances, they want to keep supply chains, they want to keep operations. And the first thing that goes in the communications budget is PR, because it's often seen as a nice to have, not a need to have. And so, you know, one of the ways that we have worked with clients is to try to make sure we're working directly with their marketing team. Because it isn't 1990, we get the New York Times and it's going to drive sales. This is 2025 where there's 10x the number of outlets or 100x the number of outlets, but each one has a very small niche, you know, readership, listenership, viewership. And so what we end up doing, again, is working with the marketing teams to make sure that the air cover we're providing is really driving that value through digital marketing. So we've talked a lot here about business processes, but let's dive back into why should you increase when dollars are disappearing? You know, Sam, to your point about people think they're going to get fired. Okay, why is I'm making these numbers up? There's a threat of 5% reduction in team, you know, in staff, and you're going to increase the marketing budget by 8%. Like, it seems like you're just spending money on a thing rather than the people. You know, how do you encourage your clients to get past that, you know, objection that can really harm company culture and reputation?
I'm sure Casey has more stories directly related to clients in this. I could talk about my own personal experience, but it is, so when you are talking about reduction in force, I have never heard anyone say, we're going to increase the marketing budget. So let's be clear about that. Maybe Dennis did based on what but,
I actually use that all the time.
Yeah, see, okay, so Dennis did
time.
that. But in my experience, I have never sat at a C-level conversation where we're saying we are going to do reduction in force and we're increasing the marketing budget. That never happens.
Okay.
What happens is you get to keep your marketing budget at the status quo, or so it's level set, or it only gets decreased 20 or 30%, right? So the conversation at that particular time becomes, you know what, we can cut this. And I understand why you would cut this, again, this big pot of money over here, as opposed to cutting a team member, right? I get that. I totally understand that. But in the long game, what's going to be the best answer for the business? And it takes some really deep soul searching and some really good strategy, to Casey's point, to say, you know what, we're going to come through this pandemic, or we're going to come through the latest crisis, whatever we've got going on, stronger by investing in our marketing. That's almost like you have to have a crystal ball to say that that's the truth. And so it's really kind of a hope and a dream and these are the strategies that we're going to put in place, and you have to believe in it to make it happen. But that's really what I've seen is it's not as concrete, which is why it's scary, and that's why a lot of people don't do it.
Casey, let's zero in on Sam's point about concreteness. What's your experience with the concreteness of laying off humans versus what's a seemingly amorphous part of the marketing budget?
Yeah, you can't do it, right? I mean, that's just a PR nightmare. But what you can do, again, I call it playing the long con. We're playing a long con when we're talking about marketing, especially when we're talking about PR, right? When there's turbulence in the marketplace, we have the opportunity to establish ourselves as a super trustworthy partner or company. We have the opportunity to be a voice when the white noise around us is getting smaller. So what we're doing is we are leaning in where we have the bandwidth to lean in for the long-term growth and success of our company. But you don't lay off and expand marketing budgets at the same time. Those two things are not congruous. I mean, I think you can position it as we're not laying off and we're going to sink more into marketing in the hopes to grow right now so we can keep our staff. I mean, there's that kind of conversation that might be happening, but your goal is to keep your people. That's part of the weathering it,
Sure. Well, and I brought that up mostly as a stark contrast, right? Sam, you were telling me that I think of the staff that you led at one point in one of your companies, it was a certain number of dollars that cost to run that team.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a 2x number of dollars spent on advertising and everything else.
Correct.
So again, I was trying to take that stark contrast, but obviously there are things like, can we find more efficient operations? Can we stop with the company jet or some other inefficiencies at the top level long before you get to team? Mm-hmm. But Dennis, you said earlier you kind of were doing the opposite of what Casey and Sam described. Can you get into that a little bit and how you ensure that doesn't affect employees who are left going, are we going to get laid off next? Or future employees who say, we heard about that.
Casey talked about transparency a little while ago. And in my world, we had 10-year record cold January, February in New England. And we're a home service company and we do gutters, clean, repair, maintain, install. And for January and February of this year, our workspace was frozen, literally frozen. It just doesn't snow that often on Cape Cod. It's not like Pittsburgh. And usually when it snows, it doesn't, I'm serious.
No, I know.
And so we had a very challenging January and February, and then we came into one of the rainiest Marches we've had in a long time. And we're getting our fannies kicked in the field. It's hard. Bad weather in my world, bad weather like rain, is good for business because I'm in the gutter world, but it's bad for work. Mm-hmm. So it's a dichotomy. So I called a staff meeting. I called it on Sundays for Monday morning at 6:30. It was yesterday morning. We brought everybody in and I sat everybody down. I said, everything's good. We're getting beat up by the weather. There's plenty of work coming in. We just got to get some good weather. No one's getting laid off. I know that your hours are down, but I made an adjustment. So everybody is going to get full paychecks indefinitely until we pull out. And we are pulling out. I can see it in the office. Everything's good. But you call a staff meeting. You tell your people everything's fine. Everything's going to be good. Number one. So transparency with your employees, transparency with everybody else around you. When I said before, whenever I make an adjustment to my marketing, it's either an adjustment or it's an increase and never a decrease. Mm-hmm. Every year we have a weather-related span of 4 to 8 weeks that impacts the work in the field that we do. And every single year we address it because it's always different. And one year, a couple of my crew chiefs were worried. Now, a lot of my top guys are on profit sharing. So gross sales and profit impacts their pay. So a few of the guys came to me, and every year it happens. We had a meeting very recently, and we made some adjustments to our strategy to deal with not so much the tariffs, but the public's impression of the tariffs. And that was our challenge this year, and we're addressing that. A couple of years ago, we noticed some changes that need to be addressed. And so what I did was, and then when you have a marketing program like I do, you can change it instantly. I can change it in moments because I have all these radio stations that I advertise with, and they all know me really well. And I wanted to try something new. So I added an extra band of afternoon drive. Morning drive is where it's at in radio world. Morning drive is 6 to 9:30 in the morning, because that's when all the people between 50 and 80 are listening to their radios in their homes or on the drive to work. That's morning drive. So you want to get them before the street hits them, before their day hits them, before they get to the office, because then everything goes sideways. The next most valuable time on the radio is that afternoon drive between 4 and 6:30 at night. So what I did a couple of years ago was I added, like, I don't know, 3,000-4,000 a month into marketing on afternoon drive only. And the change was instant. It was like we started it July 1st, and by July 2nd and 3rd, the phones were ringing more than ever before. So we make adjustments based upon what's going on. This most recent one is mostly consumer attitudes. You know, Wall Street doesn't represent business. It represents day traders and fund managers and what they think is going to happen. So Donald Trump suggests tariffs. Things go up, then they drop, the bottom falls out. Then he says, we're going to ease up on some of the tariffs on some of the other Asian nations, and all of a sudden the markets spike again. This stuff isn't going to happen for months. But the stock market is driven by opinions and attitudes of a small percentage of the people. And then the general public can choose whether they want to panic or not. Some of them panic and some of them don't. So adjusting my marketing appropriately is very important. Several of my competitors went under during COVID. Go ahead, Dustin.
Yeah, so I want to challenge you a little bit, Dad, and pivot over to Sam and Casey, because you run a small business of a few million a year. You're primarily radio advertising in terms of your monthly spend. So you can make those adjustments, but at a larger scale, you know, Sam, when you're talking about a company that wants to scale up and they're doing they're signing up for a conference and things are going south. Now, do you cancel the conference? Do you cancel the travel? You know, that's a much harder thing to decide than radio advertising. Or
I don't even,
Go ahead.
I would love to give my events people a shout out from 2020. They deserve it, and you could not, they deserve it. The amount of finagling and just managing that they had to do to figure all that out. I will be forever grateful to the events team from 2020. And I think everybody should be, because they are definitely heroes in the marketing organizations during that time, for sure. I think, so to further that point, the opportunity that exists when the market goes sideways and people are pulling back is really what you make it, right? It's really what you make it. And figuring, I tell my clients all the time to embrace the pivot, right? So there's that rock-in strategy, but embrace the pivot. We're going to change. There's things that are going to not make sense in a month, and we're going to need to adjust as necessary. And so things like, I mean, my marketing budgets in the past have been $10 million or above, right? And so it's not like you can just cancel contracts. No, you certainly can't do that. That money's spent, that money's out the door, except for in the pandemic when you can't physically get there. That was another whole story, another reason why the events team deserves a shout out. It is a lot of that. What can we control? and what can we control now, and what is that discretionary spend. So it's things like Google advertising, it's things that you don't have contracts for, the big rocks in your budget, what are those things that we can cut or cut back? And that's normally what ends up going first, which I would argue, Dustin, that the Google budget goes before the PR spend in most cases.
Really?
I would absolutely
Wow.
argue that, yes, because
Interesting.
absolutely argue that every day of the week, depending on the size of the organization. But
Sure.
that's how you would do that, is what are the big rocks? What has the least amount of impact to culture? And that's how you figure all that out.
And then, Casey, again, looking at a small business can pivot more quickly, right?
Sure.
So when you talk to your clients, those long-term plans, if you're looking 18, 24 months out for companies that have, let's say, Sam, I think you told me once you worked with banks, a bank product on a 3-year sales cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking, Casey, at an 18, 36-month sales cycle, again, you can't just change your marketing budget, change your advertising budget, or, on a dime. So how do you work with clients to look for those rocks that Samantha's talking about? Maybe they need to be more creative without, again, overloading the internal team that's already like, we're going to lose our budget. Oh, you want us to drop by 10%, but keep the same output. How do you work with those teams so they are increasing the quality and scope of marketing and branding?
Right. We get crystal clear on attribution and ROI. I mean, we really, really understand where we get the most bang for our buck in terms of our spend. And then we double down there. I would say on organizations that do have a longer sales cycle, if you are currently busy, you are somewhat insulated. So you are still in that. You're still in your marketing plan. You're not going to flinch because you're anchored in that strategy. So what we talk about is our strategy aligned with our business objectives? And the tactics can change, right? We can be fluid and nimble if the market goes a little sideways, or if we're beta testing something and the messaging's not quite working. We can make alterations tactically without abandoning strategy. And that's really what we focus on.
Well, that's a really good point. We work a lot with clients who are working on a 3 to 6 month PR plan. So
Right.
I like your point here that, again, if you're on a 3-year sales cycle, you can look, a lot of this happened with landlords during COVID. They actually had a lot of power because
Right.
there was no buyout component in a lot of the commercial real estate contracts. And so they had more power over the renters. In the last 2 years, that's reversed because now the renter contracts are ending and fewer people, like in places like DC, are working in the office.
Right. And it's forced them to really, I have commercial real
Right.
estate clients, but now they're focused on flight to quality. So their
Right.
pivot has largely been in what are the next gen amenities to attract people back in, as opposed to people have to be here.
That's right. That's right. And so, Sam, you know a lot more about this than I do, but I actually did an essay with I wrote a piece for Fox Business with a commercial real estate guy. And what we focused on was how in the DC market, there was older buildings were upgrading where it mattered most, and they were ignoring sort of vanity upgrades. And that was allowing them to compete with the newer, higher quality buildings. So Sam, you talked about technology, during COVID, obviously a lot of the tech, Zoom, Netflix, Salesforce, et cetera, all grew like gangbusters. And then in 2022 or so, some of that backed off. How would you advise companies that are going to double down on marketing and branding to make sure that they are looking to the future and not going to overspend or overstate the confidence?
It's I'll go back to recency bias again, because I think it is a real thing. And I think that's why so many of us bring up COVID, right? I mean, it has been crazy to say 5 years since that March 20th date, right?
Yeah.
But everyone brings that up because of the recency bias. And I think it just, as an outside perspective looking in, so many businesses just said, grab all the technology we can, we just need to make it work. Right. So they signed these contracts. That's how all these businesses grew so quickly, is who's the best person for the job? How quickly can we vet them? Let's sign the contract and go. Now that was a little bit of putting the cart before the horse, right? So now all of those promises that were made in those contracts back in 2020, 2023, because that still kept going up until 2023, now those are all coming due, all those promises. And so that's why when I talk about the recession, or not the recession, but the quote unquote recession, that's why you see these things happening. That's why you see, I just heard about another one today, another tech company laying off 1,200 employees. That's the reason why. We were cashing checks or writing checks we couldn't cash. And that's exactly how we've ended up here today. Now, all of those tech companies, if they want to continue to grow into the future, and I know there are very, very smart C-suite executives at all of them, they will come up with these plans on their own. But if I were sitting here talking to them, I would say, all right, well, what's up next? Like, what are your tactics in the strategy? Do you have everything lined up? What's going on? Because a lot of the world is looking to them right now as well, in terms of how are they going to function and how are they going to work. And to Dennis's point about the stock market, all of them are public. So that very much matters.
Well, that's a good point, and goes back to the recency bias as well, because we all react to what's just happening, emotionally and otherwise. So let's make a pivot here. We've talked a lot about why and how companies can focus on marketing and branding when times are tough, right? We've talked about transparency with all stakeholders so they know what's going on. We've talked about cutting everything before you cut people, so you can at least keep the marketing budget the same, if not greater. We've talked about how different business models are more or less resistant to market changes, whether it's because you have a long-term play, the 3-year sales cycle, whether because tariffs in this case are minimally impactful on your price point. But let's make a bit of a pivot here. Sam, you posted on LinkedIn 2 weeks ago that a lot of chief marketing officers don't know how to talk to the chief financial officer.
Yes.
And by coincidence, I was writing a piece on how a lot of times the communicator in the either in-house or at an agency is saying things like brand awareness or market penetration. And the business owner says, great, what does that mean? It sounds like an MBA word salad, versus we reached 20% more of our likely target audience this year through these specific tactics or strategic adjustments. So what I would like to do now is, now that we've established the need to focus on marketing and branding during tough times, how can communicators bring that to the attention of those who control the budget? And again, I'd like to start off with Dennis, because you've founded several companies in your lifetime and you're running a medium-sized business yourself. If you had, for your marketing strategy, what do terms like brand awareness or market penetration, those kinds of words, what do they mean to you? And what kind of language would you want to hear from either an in-house or an agency communications person?
Well, we're basically a small company. I run a series of small companies, so I don't have those barriers that Samantha was talking about, this department struggling to communicate with that department. As I have many hats that I wear. One of them is I run our flagship location, Cape Cod. I also assist in running our other corporate location, but I also have to demonstrate to my franchisees that what we're doing is working, and you have to do these things too, so you can have similar results. And it's all tied together too, though. Convincing my team members, my franchisees, that hiring, product development, inventory, and marketing, it's all tied together. And you got to look, and I encourage everybody to look 12 months out. Where do you want to be in 12 months? And then you have to take steps to get there over the next 11 and a half months to get there. Again, I run a series of small companies that as a group maybe make me a medium-sized company, but communication within the individual offices and communication between the offices is very important. Samantha mentioned two departments in a large company that struggle to communicate. It's hard for me to relate to that, but I can relate to it on a small level. Communication amongst the team members within the office and then amongst the other offices out there, because we do a lot of group market, all my franchisees market individually, but we as a parent company also do a lot of team marketing and group marketing. So keeping everybody on the same page, keeping everybody, even right now in growth mode, we're all growing, we're not shrinking.
Mhm.
So Sam, so go ahead and talk about how CMOs and CFOs do struggle to communicate.
This is one of my favorite topics as of late, so I could probably talk about this for a while, so shut me down if I get too far into this.
Hang on, let me find the mute button. Okay.
Yeah, you got it.
Samantha.
Okay,
there we
perfect.
go.
All right. So I will say, so marketers love to talk, and I'm going to pick on one specific metric right now, and please don't take it, anyone who loves this metric, please don't take offense, but I'm going to pick on the MQL, even though there's other things like brand awareness and all kinds of other things that we could pick on. Marketers love to talk about their pet metric and their one metric that's showing that they are successful, right?
Mhm.
Those metrics that we pick that are successful quite literally do not relate one-to-one unless you have a sophisticated organization into dollars for the CFO, right? And you have to have a sophisticated pipeline with tracking to be able to show, to Casey's point earlier about attribution, you need to have that in place to be able to say, we put $1 in here, we're going to take $1 out here. And then, of course, there's other things like PR that you may not be able to say, we're going to put $1 in here and we're going to get $1 out here. So that makes it another level. I had to learn through watching other team members. I've been fortunate enough to be part of some really good leadership teams, watching other team members how to communicate initially to the board. I partnered very closely with my CFO on a few different occasions. And I had to learn, because it isn't like there's a course in college that goes over, here are the most effective things that you need to talk about as a business leader. I had to learn what was important to the board. So we're talking about customer acquisition cost, LTV to CAC, lifetime value of that customer to customer acquisition cost, and figuring out how to actually pull all of those metrics together in a meaningful way that also had a story around it to get this synopsis together for the board in that amount of time. And so I learned very, very quickly that what my CFO cared about had absolutely nothing to do with how many MQLs I got. It was, what is the pipeline that's going into the sales team? And then how are we getting that out on the other end? What is that, and how do we pull that all together? And I think so many marketers today get stuck on, here's my MQLs, I'm successful. And I saw a post the other day that says, if the business isn't successful, marketing can't be successful. And I do believe, that's hard for me to admit, I do believe to some degree that is true. And I do believe that marketing could be crushing it on their particular items that they care very much about. But if the business is not growing, to Dennis's point, then marketing can't win. And so you really do have to speak that same language, and it takes a little while before everybody comes to reading from the same hymnal, really.
Now, Casey, how do you help your client, if you're stepping in as a fractional CCO, CMO, right? So you're talking to everybody.
Right.
You said earlier there's a number of roles you try to fix communication issues internally. You try to take companies that are stagnant and help them grow.
Right.
When you come in, how often do you find that there's a foreign language issue between the different departments and functions? And then how do you help them all speak whatever language they need to?
That's a great question, and it's never ever the same. So I would say, yeah, sometimes there's a language barrier between the bottom line and what we as marketing and communications pros do. And so it is speaking to outcomes as much as you possibly can. The other thing that I find so often is if you do not have a C-suite or specifically a CEO that has embraced the marketing function, you've set your marketing team up for failure. So a lot of times it is getting the C-suite on board to really embrace marketing as a revenue driver and as a profit center, as opposed to, just a spend. It's really showing them the way that, like, this is a way to grow your business. This is a way to move forward. So there's that language. I guess it's still a language barrier, but I think it's a basic understanding and education issue too, in terms of, oh, I'm just writing a check for all this stuff. I don't know what I'm getting, as opposed to, no, this is what I have to do to reinvest in my company for growth.
I saw that challenge when I was a political freelancer, and where everyone loves to be in the press. Everyone wants their face out there, or they wouldn't be in politics to some degree or another. And then I went into business, and Dennis, in addition to running American Gutter Monkeys, is my business partner. And we came up with this tagline: "We put you in the press." And it gets people's attention. But the follow-up question was, well, why? And I was like, we get you in the press, which in politics, the value is obvious. Let's march forward, pay me some money, we'll get you out there. And it took me about 3 years to start really saying, oh, because it puts you in front of your target audience. And it helps you establish differentiation. And it gives your marketing team, it's a tool in the marketing and branding budget that makes all of your other marketing and branding tools more effective. It took me 3.5 years. And even then, the other struggle is so many, at least in the DC area where I live, so many companies are government contractors. They live and die by the RFP. They live and die by referrals. So the idea of spending money on marketing is unheard of until you hit $100 million.
Right.
And again,
I actually wrote a LinkedIn post about that. I think it was this week, maybe it was last week, in terms of when you have a sales cycle that is long, your marketing team should be coinciding with that sales cycle and putting you, in news articles and actively marketing. So when it's time for that RFP to hit, so much of the expertise has already been shown. There's already a level of trust there. So it becomes a confirmation for you and less an interview, if that makes sense. So, while it's a different industry, but I would say you don't have to be that big to start investing in your marketing.
Well, and that was my challenge is I was raised at an inn. My parents ran an inn, and my dad ran a roofing company. And by the time I started my business, I thought, oh man, everyone must spend lots of money on marketing and branding, because that's what I saw growing up. And I realized that isn't the case. And it just took a while. And again, that was at a very small scale. I was a one-person company at the time. I can only imagine the difficulty, Sam, if you ran digital marketing for a company doing $200 million a year. I can only imagine the challenges at that level if the C-suite doesn't understand the need for marketing and branding budget, strategy, and team.
You are rolling a boulder uphill for your entire life, if that's what you're trying to do. That is what it feels like. And everyone who is a marketer who has ever tried to do that, tried to convince the CEO that there is value in marketing, absolutely understands what I just said.
Yep.
Now, in the piece I wrote for O'Dwyer's 2 weeks ago, I talked about how a lot of this goes at the bottom line, proving that the communications is driving to the bottom line. But Casey, as you pointed out, PR is hard to define in that sense. But also there are things like, are you driving the mission? Sam, you worked for a nonprofit. Which is more important, really? Is it the donors? Is it the people you're helping? Dennis, let's pivot back to you for a minute here. If someone comes to you, if you were, when you ran the inn, I know that you had a marketing agency that you worked with. If I remember correctly, when I talked to you the other week, it's marketing and branding is only important if it's driving sales, and you believe it's about the bottom line. Whereas a lot of communicators think it's also about brand awareness, brand penetration, that long-term awareness component, so that people are hearing you those seven touch point fashion. Can you dive in a little bit about where you find that balance?
First of all, marketing is expensive only if it doesn't make the phone ring.
Right.
Okay, that's That's the nuts and bolts of it. Nobody, including me, nobody minds spending money in marketing if they know they're going to make 400x or 40x or 4x. Okay. Again, I run small businesses. And the thing is, there's millions of small businesses in America, and I know these owners, and most of them are scared to death of spending money on marketing, so they don't. And therefore they find their comfort level, at a 1 or 2 person company. And they say, hey, I don't need to market. I don't need to advertise. I got plenty of work. If you run a 1 or 2 person company, you don't need to advertise. You don't. Any decent plumber, if he just answers the phone and shows up on time, he's going to have plenty of work for him and his helper. But if he wants to build a 40 person company, he's going to need a marketing department. He's going to need a budget. And that's the differentiator. To Sam's point before, we all do that. We cherry pick. I do it. My favorite number is I don't have a customer acquisition cost because it's too complex. So I take marketing as a percentage of gross sales. And that's my favorite number because it's easy and it makes me look good. It's 2.7% a year. Okay. So I know that if I need to increase my marketing, or if I'm having a challenge, I can add 3,000 a month, and I know that within 1 to 2 years I'll grow into that, and it will be back down to 2.7%. But that's long range. There's so many small businesses in this country, and most of them do find a low point to level off. I design marketing programs so they're easy. It's hard the first year. You got to get out there. You got to feel the market. You got to identify your target market. And then you find that easy, low maintenance marketing program that I currently have. Now, I've heard Sam and Casey talking about the complexities of a big and many pronged attack. You've got SEO, you've got Facebook, you've got Google, you've got so many moving parts out there. And to change is difficult because the chef doesn't ever change more than one ingredient, right? You don't add an ingredient and take one out, because then you won't know if your spaghetti sauce is good or not based upon. So you add an ingredient, then you can see what's happening. So I've always developed simple marketing program. Now, Dustin and his 2 siblings grew up in a house that was run by my wife and I, and we owned an inn. We were innkeepers because we're workaholics. And we knew that if we had children, or when we were pregnant with Dustin, that we're probably not going to be home much. We owned a construction company and we owned another company, and we were always working. So as an innkeeper, I developed a marketing program that was very simple. It was pre-internet. So we didn't have everything that we have today at our fingertips, but it was a simple program. I look for simplicity. Even if it's not as current and modern as most people think it is, because old school has become modern again, right? It always comes back around. And I try to keep it simple. I try to keep my marketing simple. I have people that I use. I have salespeople. I have radio station owners. I also have consultants in the field that know stuff that I don't know. So I use those people. So I've been able to simplify my marketing and therefore spend most of my time running my business. And everyone in here, including myself, we all have some level of marketing, public relations, or branding to some degree. And we all have to find our comfort level. A lot of you people have clients that are looking for your services. That's hard. That's hard because a lot of companies don't respect their marketing budget. They don't respect the marketing, the PR, and the branding value. They all want brand awareness, and they use the term a lot, but sometimes they don't respect the process of getting there. And to me, that's huge.
I actually just wrote a post about that yesterday, that everyone loves the before and after, but no one wants to see the hard work in between. No one wants to see those 20 steps that it actually takes to create change. No one wants to see the 6 a.m.s.
Right.
You just want to see that end result.
Right.
So it's very
Yeah.
true.
So we have go ahead.
Just to that point, Sam, yes. So at least once or twice a month, I get a call from a small business owner or an upstart, and he wants the secret pill. He wants the magic pill. He doesn't want to dedicate 12 to 18 months of his life to testing the market in many areas to see. First of all, he doesn't want to identify his target market. Well, who's your target market? Well, anyone who has a car, because I'm a mechanic. Well, okay, but how are you going to attract and attack that target market if you haven't identified it? And they don't want to answer these questions. They say, come on, Dennis, just give me the secret. Give me the magic pill so I can leave and I'll lose your phone number. They don't know that it's a process. They don't know that it's a journey. They, like Dustin said, like, and all of my kids, when all of my kids moved out, they realized what mom and dad did at home. They was too close to the forest to see the trees. And then, you know, Dustin, I remember, said, oh my gosh, I eat $400 in groceries a week. And you guys were going to charge me $400 in rent to live in the house with a gym in the basement and a garage to park the car and all the food I can eat. And my other son, Charlie, said, I can't believe I'm up to my knees in laundry because, you know, you guys did all the laundry. Well, you know, you do 2 loads a day with the family. And, you know, some people don't see the process until they leave their comfortable environment of Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, and they don't realize what went on. You know, it's the same thing in business. A lot of people, they forget about marketing. It's not a part of their equation. I'm a carpenter, I'm a roofer, you know, I own a car wash. Whatever you do, you're good at that. And sometimes they forget about marketing, they forget about advertising, they forget about public relations. They overuse things like brand awareness when the reality is they're misusing the term oftentimes. So I think that the biggest thing is business owners, if they want to grow and become a leader in their regional industry, then what they have to do is respect the marketing, respect the branding, make sure that that's a complete part of your company. Just like if you're in the car wash business, you know, you have water, you have soap or whatever you're, you know, well, you also have a marketing budget and you gotta respect that.
So we have a few minutes left, and again, I really want the communicators watching this to understand. You know, you talked about simplicity. I'll call you Dad now since it's been exposed a few times.
Okay.
You know how you've talked about simplicity, but Sam, when you're working with a tech company, or Casey, you're coming in and you're saying, "Man, this company is $42 million a year. They have 6 different communication functions, and they want to grow to 100 million." How do you keep that messaging simple, show the journey in a way that is, you know, Sam, to your early example, the CFO, or Casey, maybe it's the entire C-suite of the board. Let's talk, I want to wrap up on the both of you because you have that experience of helping companies scale without chaos, helping companies really grow past their ceilings to where they're hitting, you know, from 4 figures to 5, well, 7 figures to 8, 8 figures to 9. I want to wrap up with both of you kind of going on your tangents here.
Go ahead, Casey.
Oh, goodness. I was going to let you go first. Yeah, no, I mean, I think to Dennis's point, right? It is about being simple. It's about deeply understanding your target audience. It's about deeply understanding where they are and meeting them where they are. Like that's never going to change, even with AI, even with everything that we have going on. So let's say we come into a marketing department, it has 6 different functions. what my biggest job is normally is making sure that they're not throwing pasta on a wall and hoping it sticks. So often we're like, we have this person doing social, and we have this person doing content, and we have this person doing, paid SEO and pay-per-click, and they're also separate, right? And none of them are speaking back to the actual business objectives and the business goals. So where I come in is saying, hey, this is what we're trying to do as a business. This is what success looks like. All of you are important, but we have to align. And so the simplicity is the message, the unique selling point, what is the differentiator, and what problem we're solving.
And how do you translate that to the C-suite? Because when you've gotten the marketing team on board with, oh, we're all going to work together, which increases the synergy and the output and the effectiveness.
Right.
That story up to the next level.
Communicate it as your marketing team looks really busy, but nobody knows what the ROI is. Right? The marketing team's real busy, but nobody knows really what the spend is doing. So by getting everybody moving and rowing the same direction, we're going to A, move the needle, and B, we're going to understand the return on our investment. And that normally, when you're talking the bottom line, that's normally when they're like, sounds great.
Okay.
So I'm going to yes and everything that Casey just said. So yes and. So I always tell the leaders that I'm working with that, to Casey's point about all these people are moving in all these directions, that the answers are in the details. The answers are in what is this person actually doing in this process to make this thing work? Like, are they doing it appropriately? Or are they doing it in a way that even makes sense? That's another good one, right? So the answer is on the details. And so we take the time to follow everything all the way to the end. We follow that string all the way to the end and we knot it off. And so many times there are all these tangents that we can go down and everyone gets very distracted by those, but it's like, nope, pause that one for a minute. We're following this one. We'll come back to all those because those might be another whole journey in and of themselves. So follow every single one of them, knot it off at the end, and make sure that everyone is singing from the same sheet music again. The other point that I wanted to say is that it's so interesting when this happens, because most times when I go into an organization, people will look at their marketing team, like Casey said, everybody's running around and there's no ROI coming out. The other thing is that they're like the DMV. That marketing, it's true. That marketing,
hang on, wait. It's April 15th. Maybe it's more IRS.
Let's go with any very process-driven organization.
Bureaucratic,
Yes, let's go with that. I don't want to pick on anyone from the DMV because they're very nice people. No one from the IRS, nothing like that. But very process-driven, bureaucratic organization, that they are like that, and that they have these forms that you need to fill out and all of these different things. And so that's normally the result of exactly what Casey's talking about, is trying to show some type of ROI or trying to show how busy people are. That will typically happen. So that's another thing that I normally rip right out. No more forms, those are gone. Like those are all things that traditionally happen.
So it sounds like what you're talking about is you were very busy at first because you have to go down those rabbit holes, knot them at the end, and that takes time. You have to be very busy at first to figure out what's going on before, whether it's the data tracks that you're talking about, or Casey's talking about make sure everyone's working together. But before, or Dennis talking about making it simple after you've experimented for 12 months. So really, I mean, when we talk about the simplicity and explaining the journey, it's going to be very complicated for a while because we have to go down all those trails and make sure everyone's working together. No, Casey?
Well, yeah, I mean, no, I just consider it, how I simplify it for clients is we're looking under the hood. The first 30 days is we're auditing and we're doing a deep dive, and we're really, really getting serious about what is actually happening. And then you can start the strategy, right? When you understand where your strengths are and where the holes are and what the pain points actually are. It isn't rocket science. Sometimes it feels like it is. It really can be simple. But you just have to kind of understand the chess pieces.
Well, I want to end on your point there, Casey, because my company is about to hit 7 years, and it took a long time for me to not be afraid to tell a client, or a prospective client, we're not going to produce any earned media for you for the first 4 to 5 weeks, because we're going to have to look under the hood. You're going to have to learn what we say, and we're going to have to learn what you say. And we're going to have to learn your language, your voice, your spokespeople, looking under the hood from the PR point of view. And what I realize is that the smart clients are okay with that.
Yeah.
Because they know what they don't know, whether they're hiring an in-house team or hiring us.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as we can show that on a 7-day basis for those first 4 to 5 weeks, that there's going to be an output that is driven towards the outcome that they're seeking, that we say we can provide for them, they're really like, yeah, dive in, tell us what you need.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a really scary thing for me to be able to have to say, I can't produce, we can do output. It's not going to be the outcome for a certain time period until we get under the hood.
Yeah, realistically, I mean, but that's part of the transparency, right? And being a trusted partner.
That's right. Yep. All right, we're a little past an hour here, so everyone say your last things, and then we'll say goodbye.
I've really enjoyed listening to what Samantha and Casey talked about. It's not often that I converse with people who really understand marketing, branding, and what it is. And yeah, it's I've really enjoyed this. It's been good. It's been insightful, and yeah, wonderful. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This has been it's been really fun learning from Dennis and Samantha, and I really appreciate being included. So thank you, Dustin.
Well, it was nice to actually meet you, Casey.
Yeah, likewise.
Our first time actually meeting, so to speak.
Yes, not just LinkedIn friends.
Yeah, exactly.
Casey, Dennis, so nice to meet you both. This was a great way to spend an hour. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you so much, Dustin, for organizing this. This was excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, it was
Good
fun.
job, Dustin.
Thanks, folks. Take care.
All right. Talk later.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.